Hello, ABC colleagues. This is Jeanette Heidewald. I teach business communication at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And I've also been going to ABC conferences since I started teaching at Kelley in 1999. And I'm excited to share a video with you at the request of our ABC president and my friend and your friend, Kurt Jacobs. So I'm going to share with you some of the incredible learning experience that I had in using Zoom, especially with student teams, for my first time teaching an online class. Like many of you, you might have also been forced into online teaching for the first time. And I just learned in March. So I'm not an expert at Zoom, but I'm excited to share with you some of the great takeaways that my students helped me learn and might help you, especially if you decide to go into online teaching or are forced into going into online teaching. So I created a PowerPoint for you, and I've set up a desktop here that I can share with you to show you what did I do and what am I doing right now that makes the Zoom experience better for you and your student teams. And I also have my email address on here. If you want to stay in touch with me, you can email me at, it's my last name without the D because IU only gives us 8 letters for our email addresses, at iu.edu. I'm also excited to hopefully see you in San Diego in October. If we don't get to see each other, then we'll see each other online for the virtual conference. So what I've prepared for you today is my takeaways on success with Zoom or whichever video conferencing tool you're using and student teams. I want to talk with you about how I set up the student teams ahead of time, setting up my Zoom class with the technology so it supported the team and class experience, some of the discussion that I had with students on the first day of our first Zoom class, and then strategies for keeping the students engaged as the online class goes on and on. And then finally, if you decide, like I did, to conclude the class with team presentations, some good takeaways there as well. So setting up the student teams, I would suggest you set up diverse teams of students. I made the mistake because I made my student teams before we went online and I didn't know we would go online, that I put teams together using many different criteria, but not what do my students look like. Once I was on Zoom, I found it harder to keep track of who was who, especially I had one team in a class that I had just started that had 4 guys that looked a lot alike to me, I hate to admit, and all of their names were 4 letters long, and I had a really hard time keeping track of who was who. So I do know going into my next semester, whether we're online or not, just in case we're online, I'm going to make sure I have diverse teams, even with diverse names. That will make it easier. And then think of ways that you can communicate with these teams, since you won't be able to casually walk up and talk to them right before class. There are some ways in Zoom that you can use breakout rooms to talk to them. You could even set up your class differently so that you sometimes see 1 team or 2 teams at a time. But I know I used to walk up before class or stay after class and talk with just a team. And since you can't do that in Zoom in a natural way, so I set up other ways that I communicated. And here are some suggestions for you. You might also decide that maybe you won't meet with, like I have, for example, typically 24 students in a class, lucky me, but I won't typically, I would always in the classroom have all 24 students show up for my Tuesday, Thursday class. But with Zoom, sometimes I set it up so that I met half the class on Tuesday and the other half on Thursday. Or I met everyone on Tuesday and then I met each team for 15 minutes on Thursday. You might think of ways that you could use your time differently. The students loved it when I talked just with their team. And they said they got so much better feedback and advice, and they didn't have to arrange for everyone to meet with me at a certain time, which was hard for everyone if I just took a class and broke it into 15-minute meetings, which I would never do in a regular classroom, because why would you have students come all the way to campus for a 15-minute meeting? But now it's easy to just like turn on your computer for a 15-minute meeting. And then I highly suggest to you, this is all in the setting up the student teams. Once you have the team set up, physically print a printout of their pictures and the names of the students in teams, so that occasionally you can pick up the paper and try to figure out, wait, the breakout team, not everybody automatically went into one. you're in this team. Click, you can click them in. It really helped to have paper copies of those because I was often sharing my screen and I didn't want to look something up in front of the students. Then setting up the Zoom class and the technology, this is what I did, and it worked really well. If you have suggestions, send me an email for how to do it better, but this worked well for me. I have the Tuesday, Thursday class, so I set up 2 recurring meetings, and I had them go all the way into June, even though I knew we wouldn't keep meeting that long. But what the heck, I could always cancel it later. And I set them up to just Tuesday goes on till June, and the Thursday class goes on to June. And then I copy those URLs for the Tuesday and the Thursday, and I put them on the home page on, we use Canvas for our course management system. I put them on the course Canvas homepage, Tuesday, Thursday class. And I use the same one for all of my writing classes, the same link, which meant that I could finish an 8 a.m. and start a 9:30 a.m. class without me having to leave. The students would just leave and new students would come in. And I really like that. And I could also use the Tuesday, Thursday links for office hours if I wanted to, but I created new links for office hour times. But what all of those links do, they would let anyone in the world in, except I use the waiting room function. And my gosh, I loved it. And I definitely recommend it to you. The waiting room means that no one can pop in ever. They show up, you go in and set up, this is actually my last bullet on this slide. You can see, you can open up participants, the chat, gallery view, etc. But when you open up participants, then you'll see the waiting room and it'll show you, hey, so-and-so's in the waiting room. So I would just click students in as they would show up. And I can, if you don't know their names yet, you can have your list and you're checking them very carefully. But eventually you're going to know their names and it's easy to click, 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 click. If there's one you don't know, you can look them up. But otherwise, clicking them in. And that also meant as they came in, it was easier for me to say hello to them. So the waiting room kept me from having to make passwords and then not share the passwords too publicly and keep sending the email with a password. And I just did the waiting room. Worked great. If you think that the waiting room is too much for you to manage, you can set up a co-host, which could be a student that you think is going to show up all the time and they say, hey, yeah, I'll be your co-host. And they'll manage the waiting room for you. And that also could help if you accidentally get kicked out because your Wi-Fi is unstable. And then you won't need them to let you back in, but they could still manage the class if you drop out. Somebody who could do that for you. It's nice to have a co-host that you added in, if they're willing to do that. Once you're in Zoom and you haven't started the class yet, but just you're there and you can see yourself, go down to the bar, the bottom, and for me it's at the bottom, and that's where you can open the participants tab, you can open the chat tab, switch from speaker view to gallery view. For me, that's in an upper corner. And then you can share your PowerPoint when you go to sharing your screen, or you can set up your desktop and share your desktop, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm sharing the whole desktop, and I set up my PowerPoint slide to show in an individual window so that I could also have what, for me, I just use a Word document. I could type notes in here. So while the students are talking, if I wanted to type notes from class, I could type them here the way that I might write on a board. And I did this with my class. Typically I teach a writing course, but I also teach a course about German business and its economy and society. So these are actual notes that happen. I originally started with ideas for Germany's biggest economic and social challenges paper. And then as the students talked, I started writing categories and then subcategories as they spoke. And that was really helpful. So they ended up with seeing my notes. I didn't share my notes with them, just like I wouldn't have shared the chalkboard with them, but they were writing their own notes and they could see what I was writing and what I thought was important, the way that I would on a chalkboard. So those were ways that I set up my desktop. Now let's get to your very first day of your first Zoom class. Start with strategies. And the main strategy I said to the students is, I'm learning along with you. Let's be nice to each other and let's laugh about stuff. Because this is not all going to go well, but we should learn a lot about video conferencing because, of course, it's important now. but it's becoming more important in your workplace. In fact, all of my students have said every one of them has had an interview online now. And some of them have had recorded interviews, like kind of what I'm doing right now, but a lot of live interviews using Zoom or some other type of video conferencing tool. So tell them, we're going to learn from each other, but we're also going to let each other off the hook when things don't go well. But this part, I take the first 5 or 10 minutes of the first day of class, and every student, I give them feedback on how they look in the frame. And I tell them about first of all, if everybody's lighting is good, I'm like, everybody, your lighting is great. If somebody's isn't, I'll say, everybody's lighting is great except, could you turn the light off that's over your head? Because it's giving you a lot of backlight on the back of your head. Somebody else, do you have a desk lamp that maybe you could set in front of you just a little bit so it'll put some light on your face? And we'll do a little bit about lighting. And honestly, a lot of the students have told me since I did this lighting, framing, background talk with them, they really think about it now before they have a job interview. And their job interviews are so rare. They're really important to them right now. So you can see I also have front light on me. I turned up the light on my desktop so that it shines on me a bit more. And I closed a couple of blinds behind me so I get less backlight. You could make suggestions like this to your students, and one at a time. And they're not embarrassed about it. They're just like, oh, they're all adjusting. Almost everybody will start like this. And they're like, no, actually, Tom, could you have less ceiling for us and more of you? Just tilt down a little bit. And then, he'll tilt down. And I'll say, that framing looks great. Or if he tilts too much, I'll say, that was just a little bit too much. Just up a little bit. Perfect. Like maybe an inch above your head. Perfect. That looks fantastic. We want to be able to see your hands too. So try not to be too close to the screen, but not so far away that we wonder, where are you? So talk with them about framing, and then ask all of them to set their view on gallery view so they can see all of the students and not just you or the student that just coughed. Because that will happen. If they're on speaker view, you're talking, and then some student does that, then they show up really big. It's better to say, everybody go on gallery view. And now you're just one of the rectangles, and so is everyone else. Talk with your students, and you decide how you want to do a hand-raising option. Do you want to use the electronic little blue hand? Do you want to actually see their hand? But FYI for you, because I learned this the hard way, when you're screen sharing and you're in gallery view, Zoom doesn't let you see the other people's names anymore. Those go away. So I had one student named Ryan who put his hand up in front of his face, and I was like, somebody has a question, but I can't tell who it is, but you have a red shirt on. And so you might have them use the electronic hand raising function. You decide, mics on, mics off. If the mics are all off, they won't talk very much. If the mics are all on, you're going to have a lot of background noise. So what I tend to do is if I know I'm going to talk for a while, I'll say, hey, everybody, let's go ahead and turn off our mics. Everybody but me. For about 10 minutes or so, because there's something I'm going to talk to you about. But then we're going to discuss it, and I'd like to ask you to turn your mics back on. When you tell them, then they're all just like, okay. And if you give them something to do, it also keeps them engaged. And now they're mics off and mics on. Also with video, my students told me my class was the only one where every student kept their video on all the time. And I was so surprised by that. And they said they loved it. They loved being able to see everyone's faces because they described to me what it's typically like for them, where they're sitting in a classroom and they see the backs of heads and their professor's face. And this was their first time having a class where they saw everybody's faces, and they loved it. It also meant everyone stayed engaged because, again, if somebody started to kind of slip off to the side like this, we would all see it. Or if they got too comfortable in their bed, we would all notice. And I would say something. I would just kind of lean in and say, hey, I'll use Jane again. I don't have any students named Jane. Jane, you're kind of off to the left a bit. Can you frame up for us a little more center? And then she'd usually be like, oh, yeah, yes. And then she's back. But I didn't have to say, Jane, you look like you're falling asleep. Instead, I could just say, Jane, will you frame up for us a little bit? Oh, that looks fantastic. Thank you. So everyone can see everyone. I say video on, but then switch the mics off and on depending upon how much noise is going on. And you can tell them if they're in a noisy place, or you might just notice that they're in a noisy place. You can say, everybody keep your mics on, but Mike, you can turn your mic off. And then we talked a lot about interruptions in tech troubleshooting. We did it right at the beginning of the first day, but I reminded them through the next few weeks too. I totally expect we're going to be interrupted, and let's not stress about it at all. If your parent pops in or a sibling, I saw so many cats walk through frames and often stop here, tails right here. And then the cat, students push them out. But we expect it. It is not a problem at all. Try to set up your space and think about your background and all, but it's totally fine if we're going to be interrupted. And it might happen in a presentation too. It's fine. It's fine. One thing that I didn't know until this first Zoom class is, and the students didn't really realize it either, is that I would say about 10% of students ended up with their camera for video conferencing is not at the top like mine, but it's at the bottom of their screen. And what that meant is that while I was talking, if they took notes while I was talking, this is what we saw. We saw this, like these big spider fingers right up front typing. And it's so distracting. You have all those rectangles and a couple of them have this going. And I said, one guy was Aaron, and I said, Aaron, I got to ask you to get someplace to write on paper. You're always going to be writing on paper through the rest of our class. Sorry. And he's like, okay. But we couldn't do that. If they need to take a bathroom break, you tell them you don't have to stop or tell us or anything. Just step off to the side and mute your mic and then come back. If it turns out you've got a background issue, stop your video and your mic and then come back and turn it back on. But we'd love for you to just leave your video on when you leave, if possible. And then here's a suggestion for you. First day of class, you wonder, how do I get everybody to talk to each other? Because the students were and are worried about that. How do we not meet physically and still get to know one another? So I highly recommend you use the random breakout rooms for a 2-minute networking talk. You can give them a topic to talk about, or you can just say, hey, get to know each other. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And then you can choose breakout rooms, random selection, 2 people per room, and then go. And everyone will disappear. And then after a minute, let's say, for a 2-minute talk, you can click close rooms, close breakout rooms, and it will give them a 1-minute warning. And then at 1 minute more, so they've had 2 minutes to talk, it closes all the rooms and they all pop back in. And then you can say, that was fantastic, let's do it again. They all disappear and they'll come back. And you can do that every day if you wanted to, so they get to talk to somebody they haven't talked to yet. And then maybe they'll get to talk to someone they have talked to yet. But the students said they loved random breakout rooms where they just like disappeared and then they were with somebody else and they're like, hey, Jeanette's not here. Let's talk about what's going on. And they loved being able to talk to one another. It would be good for think, pair, share, and then come back again. You can also cold call right after that. Anytime is good on the first day and beyond, but right after a breakout room, cold calling, they just talked about something. And then you can, if it was a topic rather than just networking, then you could say, hey, what did you guys talk about? So cold calling is really nice. You might need to do through that first day of class, and as class goes on, more attention adjustments too. Keeping the students engaged as the weeks wear on, I ask everybody, please arrive 10 to 15 minutes early, which meant I had to do the same thing. And then with 5 minutes still to go, if everyone's not there yet, ask them to please message look at all the rectangles, see who's not here from your team, please ask them to join us, and then they would. The waiting room gave me the opportunity to welcome everyone by name as they came in. It took just a moment till their box arrived, and then all the tech would adjust, and then I'd welcome them by name, and they loved it. And I would ask everybody as they came in, or for the first few people who were there, share some news. What's going on with you? I ask some questions, or I just give them some categories. Anything with food, music, creative activities. Are you learning a new skill, or did you make something? you watch any movies, read any books? Have any plans coming up? Any updates you want to share with us on your siblings or your pets? And then we would just chat. Loved it. And they all got to know each other so much better. In fact, many of the students said they got to, in the Germany classes specifically, because we just met and then went on Zoom, they said, I got to know students in that class better than all my other classes because we got there early and we just talked about our lives. It was great. I think it also helped them see, hey, my life is not as bad as I thought. There still is stuff going on, even if it is, I made mac and cheese for lunch. Woo! Then more reminding to adjust things. And then breakout rooms. You can use breakout rooms for the teams that you've set up. And I suggest you also create a Google Doc and you make it for those teams. I did this for my Germany class, and so I wanted to show that to you here and see why I have my desktop. I'll share it here. So for each one of these teams, they could write in the Google Doc, and I was asking them to discuss readings and write notes as a team on the argument that they found in the readings. And so that would be claims, their own claims, but then evidence from the readings and the source from where it came from. I rotated out each discussion who was taking notes on it. But one of the things that was nice is I could go to the team's Google Doc and I can see them live typing into it. So I can see what the team lead is, what I call it, what the team lead is writing. And then I could go into their breakout room and say, hey, Will, I just noticed that you were writing a little bit of, you're writing more claims in the evidence column, and maybe you could write those here and then evidence. And he's like, well, I thought that was evidence. I said, well, here's actually, let's talk about an example of what evidence might be for this claim. And then the students and I would talk about it briefly, and Will says, oh, I totally get it now. And then I leave again, and I can see he's already starting to copy, paste, and move things in the Google Doc. It was really nice. And it was weird spy stuff that I would never do with students, but they liked it because they were learning in real time in ways that me looking over their shoulder, I could never do quite as well. And then I could give them notes and feedback and even a grade on what I saw them write in the Google Doc, if you chose to do that. You can also then give the breakout sessions with the teams a 3-minute warning by typing in. You should type a very short message because it flashes on the screen and then disappears. So maybe a 2-word message, and I would say 3 minutes left, 3-word message. And then after 2 minutes, I'd close the rooms, and then they would come back within that 1 minute. If you decide to do online team presentations, we loved them. I thought this strategy worked really well. I'll see if I can describe it quickly because this video is getting pretty long for you. I created team pairs. I'll use my Germany class as an example, but I did that in my writing class too. So teams 1 and 4, 2 and 5, 3 and 6. I asked them to practice ahead of time and to read each other's slide deck, for example, or it could be a report for the writing class, and come up with questions, do some practicing on their own with their teams, but then on the presentation day, when everybody showed up, I had teams 2 and 3, 5 and 6, and me. We all turned off our mics and video. Teams 1 and 4 left theirs on. Team 1 started presenting. There's only 8 rectangles now in our gallery view, and 4 of them are listening very intently and taking notes, while 4 of them are talking and presenting. And then when they finish, the other 4 asked great questions. They were really well prepared. They'd been engaged the whole time. The student presenter said it was the most engaged they ever felt an audience had been while they were talking, because they had peers that were really listening to them and then asked really great questions. So the presentations went well. The Q&A went really well. I put my video back on and I asked questions then too. But I kept my video off during the presentation and as long as I could during the Q&A, because my rectangle includes the top of my head with me. I'm still writing feedback. So I was writing feedback and glancing up, and I didn't want them to see me doing that. Sometimes I was checking the time on my phone, and so that works great. Then when we finished on our first day of presentations, all of us turned our video and mics on, and we all just talked about it. Everyone had presented in some way that day. Half had presented, and half had asked questions. And then we talked about it. What would you do differently? What suggestions do you give to teams 4, 5, and 6? What suggestions do you give to 1, 2, and 3 that are going to ask you questions? what do you think is applicable to interviews, etc. It's such a useful exercise. And then our next day of presentations went even better. So highly recommend those. The whole point of everything I wanted to share with you is video conferencing software can be fun. Your classroom can still be engaging. For the students, in some ways, it's even more engaging. For us, we've lost just the ability to read the room that you can't necessarily do with all the little rectangles. But there's so much importance in video conferencing for our students' work lives that it makes sense when we teach business communication that we would embrace video conferencing tools as part of our pedagogy. In fact, if we go back onto campus fully in the fall, I think I'm still going to have some Zoom days because I think it's useful for them. At least one of their presentations is now going to be a Zoom presentation because, my gosh, we all learned so much from it. So that's what I want to share with you. I hope it was a helpful video for you. I really hope I get to see you in San Diego. I'm planning to go if we're all going, but if we're not, then I'll see you virtually. I'll be there for the conference virtually. And thank you to Hear for inviting me to do this video. And I'm so lucky to be colleagues with all of you. Good luck with all of your own online teaching and just teaching in general. And I look forward to talking with you, hopefully in person. Bye-bye.